The next part of the Bryophyta cardigan is going to be working on the sleeves. You're going to make 2 of these and they are going to be identical. Go ahead and identify your size and you're going to cast on that specific number of stitches. You're going to work in knit 1, purl 1 ribbing for roughly 3 inches or approximately 28 rows, keeping in mind that the first and last stitches are selvage stitches. So you're going to slip the first, knit the last every row, just like we've been doing before. As you can tell, I've already gone ahead and finished up all of the ribbing because it's the same method that we have used for the fronts and the back. After this, to start the moss ribbing pattern, this is the one place where the moss ribbing pattern may not fit in evenly. Underneath this, in the sleeve instructions, go ahead and identify your size and follow the instructions from there, because that will tell you where to start to evenly fit this pattern into the sleeve so that it's centered. From here, we are going to increase 1 stitch each end every 6 rows or every 4 rows, depending on your size. You're going to continue doing this until you have reached a specified stitch count, and then continue working without shaping until the sleeve measures 18 inches in total or desired length. In my case, what will happen is I have cast on 58 stitches. I have worked in knit 1, purl 1 ribbing for 28 rows, approximately 3 inches. I will go ahead and I will start the moss ribbing pattern in the next row, and then every 6 rows after this, so on row 6, row 12, row 18, row 24, I'm going to increase 1 stitch at each end inside the selvage stitch. I'm going to continue increasing until I have 100 stitches in total all the way across. And I will then continue working without shaping until the piece measures 18 inches or desired length from the hem all the way to the top. And then we'll come back when we're getting ready to work on the sleeve cap. Now that we've completed all of the increases for the sleeves, we're going to begin the sleeve cap. To start with, we're going to cast off at the beginning of the next 2 rows. In the pattern, you should have a specified amount based on your size. In my case, this is 7 stitches, so I will cast off 7 stitches, work to the end of the row, cast off 7 stitches, work to the end of the row, just like we did for the back. After this, we are going to decrease 1 stitch at each end inside the selvage stitch every other row. So in the next and every other row until you have the specified number of stitches. So in my case, what I'm going to do next to do the sleeve cap, cast off 7, work to the end of the row, cast off 7, work to the end of the row. The next right side facing row, I will knit my selvage stitch, decrease, work to the last 3, decrease, work my selvage stitch, turn my work to the end of the row. And you're going to keep doing that until you get down to the specified number of stitches for your size, which in my case is 28. Yeah, 28 stitches. After that, you're just going to cast off and your sleeve is done. Once you've finished knitting all of your pieces, then we're going to get to the process of seaming and all of your finishing. So here I have all of my knitted pieces. I have 2 sleeves and my body. Next, I have buttons. So I have 9 of them. These are going to go on the front. I have a blunt, large-eyed sewing needle. Sometimes having pins is useful, and I'll show you why in a moment. Your scissors. These are mine, but really you can use any sharp scissors and any excess yarn that you have. This is what's been left over. To start with, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to seam the back neck together. Go ahead and take everything off your stitch holder. And I'm going to slide these on to some other needles. The needles don't have to be the exact same size. They're really just placeholders for now. Once I've moved all of my stitches onto 2 placeholder needles, I'm going to take one end of the tail from the back neck and I'm going to thread it onto my sewing needle. An easy trick if you have trouble getting your yarn onto these, because this one isn't super small, but sometimes people have some issues with it. An easy trick is to wrap your yarn around the thinnest part of your needle. Okay, so open it up, put your needle in, you're just going to wrap it around, pinch, pull your needle out, and then you should be able to slide everything in. That's what works for me. So once I've done that, I am going to basically be doing like a reverse Kitchener stitch. Normally with a Kitchener, you would be working from the right side of the fabric. And I am not going to be doing that. I'm going to be working from the inside. I just find this works a little bit easier for me. So once we have everything here, let's go ahead and thread our needle. We're going to be doing it like a reverse Kitchener. So we're going to be working from the inside of the garment. So I have the wrong side, or the inside of the garment, facing me. I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go in from the back so as to purl for the first stitch. I'm going to go back and do the same thing on the other side. So back to front on the needle closest to me, front to back on the needle furthest from me. Does that make sense? Okay. And all that's going to do is to secure this edge. Come back through here again, back to front on this first stitch. Now I'm going to go front to back through the second stitch, front to back through the stitch on the second needle. And you can slide this one, that first one off, because this first stitch is bound off. Just like that. So for the next stitch, we go back to front on the needle furthest from me, back to front on the needle closest to me. Pull your yarn through, slide the stitch off the needle. Next stitch, so we're going front to back on the needle closest to me, front to back on the needle furthest from me. Pull through, slide off, back to front, back to front, pull through, slide off. And hopefully here you guys can see the pattern that is emerging. On the needle closest to you, you're always going to go front to back through both, pull through. You don't have to slide the stitch off the needle if you don't want to, but it may help. And on the return, you're going to go back to front through both of those. Pull through, slide off the needle. And this is essentially a reverse Kitchener stitch. And once you get proficient at it, you don't actually need to pull them off the needle. Sometimes it's helpful, but it's not super necessary. So go ahead and do this all the way down through all those stitches. Okay. And once you've done the last two, go ahead and take your yarn out, pull out any needles. There you go. Don't worry about these bits right now. We're going to weave them in at the end. So once you have those, now we're going to work on seaming. So you'll notice I did not seam up my shoulders. I'm going to try to do all the seaming at the same time. So I'm going to take a little bit of my extra yarn here. Okay, same yarn I used before. Put it onto my needle using the same method. Wrap around, push through, and then we are going to sew these two together. Now there's a variety of ways. Some people will whip stitch, and if you can make that look good, more power to you. I cannot. for whatever reason. It never looks good with me. But this falls kind of into the grafting scenario. Front to back through that first stitch, just behind it. So right behind our selfage stitch. On the other side, I go back to front, pull through, give myself a little bit of a tail for weaving in. On the back here, I'm going to slide my needle behind a knit stitch. So now I'm going to slide my needle behind that first knit stitch. Pull through. Okay. Just kind of pull your tail over to the side. On the front, I'm going to slide behind that knit stitch. Pull through and tighten. Okay. Same thing all the way across. Slide behind this knit stitch, pull through. Slide behind this knit stitch, pull through. And if you have cast off using all knits or all purls, this gets really easy. So we're just going to follow this basic pattern all the way across. The other really useful thing is that these patterns will line up. So if you ever get to a point where you're off by any number of stitches, you literally are just lining up these patterns. And if you'll notice here, it creates a more invisible seam. I know it doesn't look very invisible at the moment. And you're trying to catch the stitches right behind your cast off edge. That's your goal. Slide your yarn through and we're gonna weave in that end. But that's your shoulder seam. All right, now we need to set in the sleeve. So right here is the edge of where we're going to put in our sleeve, and it doesn't look like it's gonna fit. I promise it will. I do. Now some people have problems setting their sleeves in. Some people have issues setting in their sleeve. So here we are on the back. This is where your pins come in. This is just some little tricks that I have learned. Sometimes people, when they start to set in a sleeve, they'll start here at this corner and then they'll try to work around and make it even. I found this doesn't work very well. What I found does work is to start in the center. And when in doubt, use some pins. So find your center stitch. Sometimes it will be, in this case, it'll be in between two stitches. In my case, it's right there. I make it really easy. I just count in the patterns and then whatever it is in half. And then I line this up, seam right there. Then, and I promise this does fit. It doesn't look like it's gonna fit, it'll fit. I'm going to line up my cast off edges. These guys are the same length, so I know for a fact that they will fit together. So just use some pins or whatever you have. These are just the sewing pins that I have. And it's kind of to give me a mental reference point. Same thing for over here. This is harder to spread out so you can actually see it. Then, once you have all that, or you trying to have all of that laid together, you take the middle of each of these, lay them on one another, pin it. Find the middle, should be right about there, pin it. Okay, same thing on this side. Pin these together, find the middle, pin it. Find the middle, pin it. Find the approximate middle, pin it. So now that we have the sleeve pinned in, we need to go ahead and start sewing it in. I have here a length of leftover string from the yarn. I try to shoot for twice the length of the sleeve, and that's pretty easy. You just kind of measure 2 to 3 times that amount. Should be more than enough. Take our sewing needle, slide underneath, pinch. There's a nice little flat loop, and put our blunt sewing needle through. Now we're going to come up the shoulder seam. So I start at the top of the sleeve. This lets me evenly add things in because I can go back and forth if I have to. You're going to find the center of the top of your sleeve, which is for me right there. It's in between 2 stitches because this is an even amount. If it were an odd amount, I would simply find the 1 stitch in the center. Because it's an even amount, I'm going to start on the body side, because we are going to basically graft these together. So we're going to start here, reach out, grab a stitch, go back and forth. And this is really just to center the sleeve itself. So you're going to come in, and when you go to pick up this stitch, or any of them, you'll notice on the edge here all that work we did for selvage stitches. Going to leave you with a nice edge here to work with that you can, so you're going to go inside that first stitch, inside your selvage stitch. So let's come up here to the top. I'm going to reach basically underneath the seam we just put in, behind that first stitch. Pull my yarn through, and then just to make life easier, take the 2 ends, kind of line them up, and then pull them so that they're even. Okay, and then you can work with either side. I'm going to work on this half of the garment because that's where my needle is to start with. So now that I know where my center is, put my thumb there. You can take out that pin. I'm going to reach underneath that first stitch, just like we did for the top edge of the shoulder. Pull through. I'm not going to pull through super tight because I'll pull the other yarn through. I don't really want to do that. You can just leave that other yarn off to the side. It's not hurting anybody. You're going to come back up to the top. Again, look for your selvage stitch. I know it's kind of hard to see on here, but on your piece it will be much more obvious. And then you're going to reach behind that selvage stitch. Pull through. And then you're going to reach behind 2 stitches on here. And the reason I have you do 2 stitches instead of 1 is that selvage stitch is done every other row. If you had a stitch, because we slipped it, this is every other row. If you had one that was every row, like on a color work piece, I would recommend that you do this every row so that they even out. But since it's every other row, we're picking up 2 stitches along here, and you're just going to do that all the way across the top. When you get to a pin, you can go ahead and just take it out. What you're going to find is that these are going to line up, because I know when you laid this out initially, it didn't look like it was going to fit. It never looks like it was going to fit. It'll fit. Now I'm just going to rotate this to make it a little easier for me to see. And you can see here where those selvage stitches are. Salvage stitches. Now it's just 1 to 1. It's basically, we're just doing a mattress stitch. So once you've got the shoulder sewn in, we're going to go ahead and sew up the arms and the sides. Now, as you've been adding in other balls of yarn, you probably have a number of these like little leftover strings. I always recommend that you leave them in there because they will come into play later. The next thing to notice is that when you, on the sleeve, because of your increasing, you're going to be able to match up these stripes here, these ribs. So what I do, I come down to the bottom where we have our cast on yarn, put that on our needle. I come in behind the selvage stitch, pull through. Again, behind the selvage stitch, on the other side, pull through. Behind the selvage stitch. So you're going to go behind one, and the same thing on the other side. And you're basically just going to repeat this pattern, which is this is called a mattress stitch, and you're going to do it up the side of the arm, and then you're going to do that same process up the side of the body. As you come up to extra yarns, like you can see here, I joined in a new ball of yarn right there. When you come across these, you can either start sewing with a new thread. Okay, I'll probably use this one because it's longer. Or leave them to the inside, and we're going to come back and we're going to go ahead and weave those in. I like to weave them in on the seam. Let me show you on the other side. You will end up, once you've sewn everything together, with a seam. Okay, you can see it right there. There's our little selvage stitches, and I will just take my needle and weave up through the seam itself. Probably do that for 2-3 inches and then trim things down. Okay, so you're going to, and here I've already done it on this side, where I have sewn together my sleeve, and it's going to come, the bottom of your sleeve will come out looking a bit like this, where it basically makes like little V's up the arm, and then there's the side seam. Okay, you're going to do that, and then you're just going to weave in all of your ends. So we'll come in, we'll weave in the end back there. I really recommend, like, as soon as you're done with one seam, just weave them in. The next finishing piece that we're going to have are going to be finishing off our buttonholes and adding on the rest of the buttons. So when you go to put on your buttons, I literally just lay everything out and we'll put a pin in wherever my buttonholes are. Take it apart, and then I'll just sew on my buttons. But let's get these last two buttons on. If you need to, go ahead and cut another piece of yarn. Normally I like using any extra yarn from seaming, but I think I'm going to use all of that there to make the seam. The way I like to do this is come up underneath wherever your pin is. Okay, come up from the bottom, and slide your button on. Leave yourself a little bit of a tail because that's what we're going to use to tie this off with. And go a stitch or two over. Come back through. And I'll probably repeat this 4 or 5 times at least. Once I feel like I've got that secured on fairly well, and I probably overly secure this, to be really honest. I come back behind the button on the wrong side, and I literally just tie it. Tie it in several knots, at least 3, and then just trim. Okay, one more time. I come up from the bottom, take out my pin, slide my button on, now there are many ways to put on buttons or do seaming or anything like that. This is literally just how I do it. You do not have to do this, and this is of course only if you have buttons. You would obviously not do this step if you did not have buttons. So now that we have all of our buttons on, we're going to do the finishing on the buttonholes. This seems like such a weird little step, but it does make a huge difference in securing these. I mean, is it absolutely necessary? No. Will your outfit still work without this? Yes. Do I recommend you give it a shot and see what I'm talking about? Absolutely. It takes about 5 minutes. All you're going to do for this is literally whip stitch around the edge of your buttonhole. That's it. When you get to the top, when you get here, you'll notice that there's a string that comes over on top, and then it comes around from the back to the front, back to the front, back to the front. We're going to aim to go where it crosses. So when it comes out from the back, there's also a piece that goes on the front, making a little loop. We're going to aim to go inside of that. Or that's where I aim. If it's easier for you to aim somewhere else, then go ahead and do that. When you get to the sides, I would just go down. So the point of this is to help secure this edge as well, because here's where it's going to stretch and put a lot of strain on things. Then I just come in here to the back, and right where we started, just run my needle through that. Okay, once that's done, even everybody out, trim them off, and that buttonhole's been finished off. Okay, one more time, come in from the back. And what I'm doing to secure this other end, by the way, I just lay it here, and then when I whip stitch over the top of it. And that way you are finishing off your buttonhole and securing your thread at the same time. Like, if you can weave in as you go, I recommend that you do that. It will just make life easier. Okay. Up and around the top. Up and around the top. And search for the inside. And then just weave it in. Alright. Trim. And buttonholes are done. Really all you have to do now is just seam up the sides and weave everything in and wash and block, and you're done. That's it.